Hey, is this thing on? Hey, good morning, everybody. How about them dogs? All right, let's pick it up here. Good morning, I'm Joe Cronk. I'm the chair of the Terry Third Thursday program. I'm extremely pleased to be with you this morning. I am representing our Honorable Dean Ayers, who is making his way across the state of Georgia, taking the economic outlook. He's down in Jekyll Island today, so I'm sure he's wishing us well. First off, welcome to Terry Third Thursday, and welcome to the newly renovated Terry Education Center, or the TEAC. How many of y'all are here for the first time? Raise your hand. All right. Well, you're fortunate enough to come to see a completely renovated facility. Previously, the speakers would be over there, and you'd be staring kind of out looking at Lenox Square. But the Terry folks did a fantastic job renovating it, completely adding state-of-the-art amenities and facilities. So we're happy to be back here. We were over at Synovus for a couple of months. As you know, this is a monthly breakfast speaker program. It's designed for alumni and students to come together and do networking. It takes a lot to put this together, and I want to take a couple seconds to recognize the brains behind the organization. Christine and Kate, if you could step forward here, give them a round of applause. Y'all know it takes a lot of work in planning and organizing and logistics, and they're the folks that make it happen. So on the way out, when you're looking for your parking validation, if you would give them a high five or a fist bump. Also like to recognize the sponsors you see up on the board beside me. We couldn't do it without these sponsors. Thank you very much for your support. And a special shout out to Synovus, our corporate sponsor. Give them a round of applause. As I said, they lent their Cobb County headquarters facilities, and it was really cool. I'm kind of an in-town guy, but it was cool to watch the sun come up over the battery over there for several months. Also like to recognize our fellow alumni board members. If you would, raise your hand. The Terry Alumni Board, Nancy, Bonnie. And then this is my co-chair, Eddie Osmond. He will be taking the helm from me next year. Good luck with that, Eddie. And I got two more people I'd like to recognize, two more sponsors. The media sponsors, number one, the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and number two, Public Broadcasting Atlanta, WABE. Give them a shout. Before we bring up our friend Jim Hannan to talk about Koch transformation, I want to give you a preview of the next 3-month speakers. And if you're inclined to pull out your smartphone or your mobile device and put in the dates for the next 3 programs, we'd love to have you come back. On February 20th, we've got the CEO and chairman of Mark Spain Realty. Imagine most of y'all have seen him on the billboard, heard him on the radio, or seen him on TV. The guy is a marketing machine, and we're pleased. Nancy, thank you for setting it up. On March 19th, my friend, the CEO of public company Pulte Homes, will be here. He is a young, dynamic, energetic CEO, and looking forward to having Ryan Marshall here. And then on April 20th, a global company, Brinks Corporation, which the CFO is headquartered here in Atlanta, Ron DeMonico will be our speaker. Ron and the CEO and the leadership team took over the leading of Brinks 3 years ago, and they've gone through a global transformation. I've worked extensively with Ron on the CFO Roundtable, which we partner with the University of Georgia in the same space. So it'll be a wonderful set of speakers, and we hope you can make it. One more point. If you're inclined to come regularly to this program, talk with Christine or Kate, as I did. You can get an annual pass. You get a discount, and you don't have to sign up every time. It's just one swipe of the card, and you're in the game. All right, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Hannan. As I said, he is the CEO of Koch Enterprises, part of Koch Industries. And today he's going to share his thoughts on the Koch transformation and the Koch story. He currently is the Executive Vice President and CEO of Koch Enterprises. And get this, that includes Georgia Pacific, Invista, Molex, Guardian, and their investment in a technology company called Infor. So it's a huge portfolio. And not only is he responsible for those businesses, he sits on the board of all those businesses and on the board of Koch Industries and a company called Koch Business Solutions, which is the shared services company that services all the Koch businesses. So he's got a wide purview. Previously, he was the CEO of Georgia Pacific, who we all know is headquartered here in Atlanta. And they've got all kinds of different businesses, including tissue, packaging, pulp, paper, cellulose, non-wovens, building products, and chemicals. So the gentleman looks after a lot, and he's on the go a lot. He started with Koch in 1998 in the mineral services business. He's originally from Connecticut. He grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he has a bachelor's degree in business and accounting. Are there any CPAs in the room? Any accountants? Be careful. This is what you may turn into one day. All right. Since relocating to Atlanta in 2005 with Susan, his wife, and his 3 daughters, Jim's been heavily involved not just in business but in the community with his leadership, philanthropic commitments, and his service. Jim works with the Atlanta Police Foundation. He serves on the Atlanta Committee for Progress, and he sits on the board of the Georgia Research Alliance, Woodruff Arts Center, the Commerce Club, and the Educational Foundation for California State East Bay. Jim and Susan are passionate supporters of Komen Atlanta, and he was honored with the 2016 National Human Relations Award by the American Jewish Committee. He was also named the most admired CEO for manufacturing by the Atlanta Business Chronicle in 2014. I've had the honor of working and serving Georgia Pacific for many years, most recently with Koch. I've had the privilege of working on projects and working in the community with Jim. He's an outstanding leader. He's a wonderful family man, a great community guy, and above everything, just a great guy. So join me in welcoming Jim Hannan.
Thanks, Joe. All right, can you hear me okay? See if I can avoid all these mics. So I have a deck, which those of you know, see, that's what I was worried about. Those of you who know me, I very rarely use a PowerPoint. And so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, what I was going to do is a couple of things. Talk a little bit first about Koch and give you a sense of who we are. And I'm going to start by talking about vision. And the reason I'm going to do that is really I don't know if we can control that or not, Christine, but yeah, the reason I'm going to talk a little bit about vision is when I think about what we're trying to do and the discussion I'm going to have on transformation, we start with how do we align everyone around a vision to get the organization all moving in the same direction. And so at Koch, we think about the vision as our North Star. And so I'm going to start and talk a little bit about Koch and then a little bit of our vision, and then I'm going to move in and just talk about transformation and leave some time for questions at the end. So let's start with Koch Industries. Some of you are probably familiar with Koch. This is a company that started as an engineering and crude oil gathering business in the Midwest 90 years ago. And you say, well, how did that become the second biggest private company in America? And how did we end up with 130,000 people in 60 countries around the world? And I would tell you there's a few things that I would attribute that to. And I think Charles Koch would say something very similar if he were standing here. He'd just say it better than me. First, the company's remained private since its founding, and the shareholders have consistently reinvested 90% of the earnings back in the business. And that sounds like a straightforward thing, but when you think about what that means, it means one of the biggest challenges we have is continuing to find opportunities that we can pursue with our capabilities. And so one thing that makes us different when I talk about vision is we don't think about our vision as based on industries, we think about it as based on our capabilities. So where do we have advantages in capability, and what opportunities can we apply those capabilities to create the greatest value? And then taking one step further, as we capture those opportunities and develop new capabilities, how do we find then new opportunities to go after? And that's the way we think about what we call virtuous cycles of mutual benefit. And this is what we talk about internally when we talk about what has made Koch successful. It's this capability-based model that allows us to pursue opportunities for where we think we have advantage and can create value, and then this cycle of doing that over and over again. And what that means when I say we've invested 90% of the earnings back into the business is that since 2003, we've reinvested about $110 billion. So a pretty substantial amount of capital that has to be put to work. In the last 5 to 7 years, more than 20 billion of that has been deployed into areas like technology, things that have tailwinds and that are helping us drive transformation. So an important backdrop as you think about the rest of what we'll talk about. And then we have a very distinctive management philosophy and culture that we call market-based management. And we spend a lot of time working on connecting people to our guiding principles, which drive our culture, and this overall framework that we call market-based management internally. And it starts with that vision and alignment around the vision. And the gist of market-based management is simply saying what has made free market societies and economies the most successful structure in the history of the world in terms of lifting people out of poverty, creating standards of living, and creating value in society. How do we do that inside the firm? And that's the gist of what we're trying to accomplish every day by building a beneficial culture to do that and applying that philosophy. So what's in Koch? I'm not going to go through this in detail. You heard Joe. He did an incredible job of describing Georgia Pacific. He knows the company well. But when I said we're capability-based, you can see as you look at this, Georgia Pacific I mentioned, Invista is in chemicals primarily into the nylon value chain. Molex makes electronic components and solutions. Guardian is in structural and architectural glass and painted and chromed auto parts. Koch Engineered Solutions does all things engineering around the chemical industry, from manufacturing components to building plants for people. Flint Hills Resources is a big refining company. Koch Ag and Energy Solutions is a huge fertilizer company, primarily in the nitrogen business. And then the minerals and trading business is dry bulk and financial derivative trading of all kinds of commodities. In addition to that, we have a number of investments that fall into different parts of Koch or into a separate structure we call Koch Equity Development. And I put a couple on here as examples because they have an Atlanta presence and they're important to some of the things I'm going to talk about. One is Infor. Infor is the third largest ERP software provider, purpose-built solutions, deep in verticals and highly capable. It's something that we're heavily invested in both as an owner and as a customer across the Koch companies. In fact, we just launched their human capital management software for all 120,000 or 130,000 plus employees around the world in the beginning of December. And by the way, the CFO is sitting right over here, Jay. They have a big presence in Alpharetta. And then Colonial Pipeline, some of you know, is an Atlanta-based company. The reason for showing you this is to not, let's talk about all of Koch, but to show you how diverse the businesses are. And if you think back to what I said about being private, could you imagine having to explain this to the public markets and why these are the things that make sense for us? So we think being private is a huge advantage. That's one reason, because we can be capability-based in our vision and the opportunities we pursue. But there are many other advantages around the way we deploy capital and make decisions over the long term that also benefits us. So let me talk about vision for a minute and how I think this really ties to what we're going to talk about with transformation. So at the highest level, we would say the purpose of business in society is to make people's lives better by creating or providing services and products that they value more highly than their alternatives and doing it responsibly, consuming fewer resources and what goes with that. And the reality is then we would say, to the extent that we do that, our profitability over the long term is a true measure of the value we create in society. That sounds really simple. There's a whole lot of dynamics to think about that. And what we're ultimately trying to do with this is that point on virtuous cycles of mutual benefit, drive those virtuous cycles. We go through and think about our vision on a periodic basis, and we look at it as a living and breathing document that, as I said, is our North Star. So all those companies you saw all have their own visions, but all that are foundationally based on the Koch vision. And so when we're trying to build these virtuous cycles, we have thought about a few things, and in 2018 we went back and Charles really led us through an effort to revisit our vision, which we've done probably every 3 to 5 years. And I would tell you this change has been a bigger change to the vision than anyone since the 20 plus years I've been at Koch. And it's because of what we see in the environment we live in. So the pace of change that we see in our personal lives and in business has never been greater than it is today. And what's critical for all of us in business, and quite frankly, in all aspects of our lives and as people and employees, is to understand that we can't be comfortable with how things are today because they can be much better and we're going to be disrupted. And so when I say that pace of change has accelerated, I mean, you all know this, and those of you who are students have probably studied it recently, but the longevity of companies is doing this, right? Because they're being disrupted more rapidly. The amount of time a company is in the S&P, for example, is shrinking in terms of number of years before it's disrupted and displaced by another. But there are simple examples in our lives. Who has a smartphone handy? So that iPhone in Joe's hand's been around for about 11 years. His actually probably only about 9, just kidding. But I had to take a shot. So think about when those of us that are old enough to remember, think about the phone that we had at our house that was connected to the wall with the cord. Do you remember how every year it'd be thinking like in March, the new upgrade's coming out, I can't wait, I'm gonna go wait in line for it? Oh, that's right, that never happened. Today, that happens every 6 months, right? And we're seeing the kind of disruption in our personal lives. Joe asked you to put all those things in your schedule and then swipe your card. You could probably tap it too, using your phone, to do all those things. That's simple examples in our personal lives, but it's happening everywhere in our society. And so that urgency underneath our vision is the critical reason we change the vision. And I'm going to focus on 2 things. The first is we think it's necessary to be a preferred partner to all our constituents. And what I mean by that is we need to partner with people who have aligned vision and values and complementary capabilities. And so for our customers, that means the people who value how we differentiate and are willing to reward us for it in a way that's mutually beneficial. For our suppliers, it means people who are going to bring innovation and we're going to reward them for that, but who are willing to take risk with us to get in the game with us in a true partnership sort of way. And that's not everybody. It's not everybody. It means for our employees, the same thing. We want people who are contribution motivated, going to come to work thinking about how they use their innate abilities to create valued skills that help us create value for our customers, because otherwise there's no reason to be in business. For our communities, we want to be in communities where we have a rich relationship with our communities and we help each other succeed. And even with things like the regulators that we're involved with, we want to understand what's important to them and help them drive change and innovation and be more successful in what they're trying to accomplish. So in every aspect of our business, we want to be partners with our constituents where we can. And then the other thing we have to do is drive perpetual or continuous transformation. And I think historically a lot of folks would have talked about what business is trying to do, and they talk about continuous improvement or just innovation in general. And what I would say that the difference today is the level of disruption we see and the things that are happening to all of our businesses drive us to think much bigger than that. We've got to come up with new visions, new methods, new processes, new products, new ways to go to market. It can't just be incremental innovation or small changes. And that kind of challenge is what we really pushed into the organization with the vision. And so what's driving Koch's transformation vision and what we're trying to accomplish is this vision. We've been working on it longer than the vision, since the vision was established in 2018, but this is what drives us in the organization. And then our vision also says we're going to have to stay private and we're going to continue to reinvest, and those are important. So what's the challenge for companies like ours? If you think about, and actually really any company, but I'm going to use companies that are already in business to talk about. We have what I call the dual transformation challenge. How do we drive disruption, creative destruction in our businesses and transformation, and keep the trains running? Because all the businesses you saw, those are all successful businesses. Every one of those is around and well known and successful in its market because it's done well creating value for customers for many, many years. That said, it's also subject to the same disruption I talked about. And so we have this challenge of how do we do this and that, right? How do we keep the trains running and transform everything we do? Not just our businesses, but our back office, every capability we have, how we serve our customers, all of those things. And so that's the challenge all of us face, and it's expensive and it's hard to do. And so that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about. And I'm going to start with a few examples. So today, if you look at the automotive industry, and by the way, we're in auto in a lot of our businesses, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it used to be you could think about the big 3 and the big European players and a few players in Asia, and you kind of had it covered. Now you have to be thinking about some tech companies like Tesla, and then Google and Intel and Hertz, and who else, right? I mean, there's a lot of companies now that are becoming auto players as we think about electrification and autonomous vehicles. And so as you think about what disruption's happening there, you're seeing some things that really are signals of what I'm talking about here. So if you think about maybe a year ago, I think Ford took about a $7 or $8 billion charge to write down a bunch of assets. That's what this was. They were saying, we've got all these assets that no longer can do what the market wants, and we're taking a huge write down. And by the way, we're setting up this separate vehicle, this entity, another public company that's going to pursue autonomy. And they're doing that because they don't want it in the earnings of the base business, because it's going to lose money for a while they're trying to figure it out. You saw last September, Aptiv, which is a tier 1 auto supplier, and Hyundai announced a similar deal. They put a joint venture together, kind of putting $2 billion each into it to drive autonomy. They said, it'll be, by the way, don't look at anything in the P&L. It's going to be until 2022 or something before we launch the first sort of level 4 autonomous vehicle. That's because it's expensive and they didn't want it in the base business, right? They've got to do both though, and there's a lot to that. If you think about the disruptions you've seen, and I mean, we could talk about older things like books and Amazon, or Barnes and Noble versus Borders, and what happened when Amazon went down that path. Everybody knows those disruptions. If you think about what we've seen in the ride-hailing business, you saw people take advantage of a bunch of changes, right? Ubiquity of that device that Joe showed you, connectivity being available all the time, people's willingness to suddenly get in a car of a stranger, which really was a big change, right? The fact that you were connected, though, all the time was a big part of that, too. And then somebody realized you could use AI, right, software, and a huge untapped amount of capacity, because all of us have vehicles parked in our garages that are being used 3 to 5% of the time. And so there was an opportunity there, and we had an economy where people were becoming more willing to do gig work. So you had folks that wanted the freedom to be out there being an Uber driver or a Lyft driver or whatever the next one's going to be. And I share that one because if you were a taxi service, you saw, or what they did in London, they're going on strike, they're trying to put regulations in to stop it. Obviously that's a short-term solution. It doesn't solve the problem for them. They're going to get disrupted. And we see this over and over in industries every single day. And it's expensive and it's hard to do. And we're worried about it in every one of our businesses, and we should be. And all of you should be, because it's going to happen everywhere. Now I'll say this for the Terry folks. If you're in education or government, it seems to be happening slower. So what do I think successful businesses have to do this, and what are we trying to do? First, you have to find time to do it. You can't say to everybody, in your spare time, drive transformation, because we all know we have a burning platform in our office every single day, a list of things to do, and we're not going to go work on this if we don't. Separate it and say we got to have time, and we got to prioritize. We got to get better at recognizing those things that are being disrupted and where we're just continuing things that don't add value, and eliminate the waste attached with that. We got to automate, and we're doing that all over our businesses. And that's not just, for example, robotics in factories. That's how do we apply technology, whether it's RPA in the back office, or whether it's AI in the facilities, or other technologies to do that, to automate. You have to redeploy resources, and those examples I shared with the auto business are examples of people redeploying and then setting aside resources to do that. And I think those are good examples of places you see that. You have to better develop and apply skills and knowledge across your business, and I particularly will focus on knowledge. One of the things that we see as an advantage, because of the scale of our business and the diversity of our businesses, the ability to share knowledge across that platform. 10 years ago, a lot of problems in businesses seemed to be industry related. Today, that's not the case. A lot of our businesses, although they're in different industries, face very similar problems. How do I deploy data? How do I think about technology? And so we're developing knowledge networks across our organization to take advantage of that. We're becoming, or setting an expectation that we're going to be a lot more experimental. We're going to try a lot more things, we're going to fail fast, and we're going to learn from those things. We've got to do internal and external knowledge networks now. So if you think about any one of our businesses, or any business you're involved in, there's a bit of knowledge in your business from everything you do, and then there's all kinds of knowledge out there in the marketplace that can be gathered and used to make better decisions. Building those networks is something we're working on. Optimizing structure, much like that phone I described on your wall when you were a kid, if you're old enough to remember. I think the organizations that most of us work in still look like they did when that phone existed. Hierarchical structures, lots of layers. And where we need to get, if we're going to take advantage of the best knowledge and the best capabilities to go work on the highest value opportunities or problems, is we're going to have to become more borderless. We're going to have more self-directed and autonomous teams. We're going to have a structure that facilitates that and that rewards that behavior from an incentive perspective inside the organization. And again, that would be hard in Georgia Pacific. Think about doing it across those 10 big companies I described and then all the capabilities that support those. So those are things we're working on. You have to identify better methods, and we're doing this in every one of our businesses. When I talk about virtuous cycles of mutual benefit, that's one step in that process. But we're thinking about how to use design capability, whether it's about our organization, how we make decisions, how we move faster, how we change cycle times. So I would say historically in our businesses, and this is true in a lot of manufacturing, I would challenge to the group, we were always looking for the sure solution. We wanted to know with 95 to 99% likelihood. By the way, anybody who works in advertising or other areas like that knows this is hard to do, but we always wanted to get to that 99% solution. Today, we got to reduce the cycle time. We got to go when we got 80% with a minimum viable product or capability and get out to the market with it, because somebody else is going to beat us if we don't. And that last 19 or 20% takes a lot more work than the first 80 in many cases, so the cycle time can be reduced dramatically. All of our experimentation has to have that mindset, and so we're building capability to do that. And then we've got to recruit and retain the kind of talent that's going to help us be successful at this. And so there's two elements to this, right? One is how do we go out and find people that are going to bring a different mindset, become change agents, transformation agents, and then how do we empower our people, give them the tools, give them the continuous learning and the opportunity to transform themselves and apply that mindset to everything we're doing. And those are efforts that have to be specifically applied across the organization. And so we're doing that in all of our businesses. And then I would tell you, everything you see on this page, you could also apply to any individual. How do you as an individual think about what you do every day? And should I be thinking about this list and whether what I'm doing today looks a lot more like that old phone? Or am I actually transforming myself, right? To be able to create more value in this type of an environment. So let me now maybe switch and talk about a couple of examples. And the challenge with something like this is you could talk about it all day. And what I wanted to do is try and provide a few examples, and I've broken them into buckets, digital, communication, talent, policy impacts, and value chain, to try and use them. But let me start with the digital transformation. And by the way, that's a picture of Infor's lobby in New York. So on the manufacturing side, historically, if you looked at Georgia Pacific as an example, we have 25 huge mills spread mostly in the US in this case. They're all different, but they all do the same thing to one degree or another, and they have very similar equipment through certain parts of the process, particularly the bigger, more expensive assets. And so as you look at how we ran those in the past, every one of them ran independently. We had a distributed control system, and we had operators who worked on those assets. A few years ago, we set up a collaboration center down at the edge of the tech campus. Sorry about that, but it's right by Georgia Tech. And I didn't wear yellow today, at least, right? And we started to hire a bunch of engineers that didn't know anything about our business. And then we brought a few subject matter experts in. We brought some preferred partners in on the outside, right? People who we work with in the supplier relationships. And we set up this collaboration center, and we took the opportunity to take advantage of the fact that the cost of data, the cost of compute, the cost of search, the cost of computation, the cost of building algorithms and AI and ML is all rapidly driving to zero. Sensors cost almost nothing now, right? Compared to what they cost just a few years ago. And so we took advantage of all of those things, and we said, we're going to build out a capability here to start with monitoring equipment that's common across these 25 facilities. And as a result of that, if we said, let's focus on one particular element, because we're doing lots, right? But focusing on one element, if we say, look, we want to understand how to maintain rotating equipment better, historical practice in industries like ours has been to do predictive maintenance, or to do preventative maintenance. So we would have people on a regular schedule doing lubrication and other kinds of maintenance. And that's great. It's better than not doing any maintenance. But the reality is, whether you need it or not, you're doing it. And so we started to take the challenge and say, could we get to predictive and then prescriptive maintenance with data? And so the ability to take the data we have in our systems from our control systems already, to add sensors where we think we can get the right data from those assets, whether it be vibration or temperature or things like that. And then the ability to use the cloud and edge-based platforms, the guys we have in our data science capability writing Python code to understand how to become more prescriptive. We said, we want to get to, here's the goal, the audacious goal, we want to be able to know with a high degree of certainty 90 days before a piece of rotating equipment fails. So that we can schedule it instead of reacting to it or just schedule maintenance on it whether it needs it or not. And so surprisingly, we're probably at 45 now. We probably think we know with a greater than 85% probability when a piece of rotating equipment, a pump, certain equipment like that is going to fail 45 days before it does. What that means in our plants is that we can schedule the maintenance when it's convenient to do it. We can get the right people there. They don't have to be there all the time. We can get the right parts there when we need them. We can increase the operating rate of the asset. We can improve the quality of the product, and we can better serve our customers. It's pretty valuable. Pretty valuable. On these big mills, you've got situations where one piece of rotating equipment or a pump can largely shut down $1 billion asset. Now, we have lots of them, right? Hundreds of thousands of pumps and rotating equipment, but being able to understand that about all of those is critical. Another example in the supply chain. So we have a lot of customers, and we're trying to make them happy. We have a logistics group that works across all the Koch companies doing multimodal transportation of all sorts. And that gives us some purchasing leverage and all those kinds of things. It gives us the ability to understand all the things that you would think about old school business. Yeah, that makes sense, right? But the things we're also doing, on top of that, we've built a transportation management software tool. We've built a reverse auction tool that essentially helps us buy freight for us and for third-party customers. We've built the capability to drive tours on that, and then we've partnered with our internal data analytics company called i360, which has lots of data on lots of things. And we built capability to improve predictability of delivery. And today, we believe it's 30% better than anything that's on the market and getting better faster than anything on the market. And if you think about what I said about knowledge networks, what's important to know, where's the truck, because we have IoT on all those trucks now, right? We know where a truck is because there's a sensor on it. We are able to then take all of our own data and know the shipping lanes and the pair things and all the things that are in the data. But we can add to that weather data, construction data, traffic data, and other pieces of data, and write the right kind of algorithms and then train them to be able to tell us with a much greater degree of certainty when something's going to arrive. And now if you think about why that matters, first of all of our customers want visibility. But more importantly is we can then start to understand what can we change about picking the delivery time so we see less traffic, right, less issues. And then we can work with our customers to have them agree, which gives us better performance. All of those things allow our customers to make better decisions about when to staff their warehouses, when to receive product, how to stock their shelves, what they need to do for all of their business to be successful. So it's a huge win-win when we're successful with these kind of things. And this is not a small thing. This is a big data exercise. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of horsepower doing it. But the value is tremendous. And then I'll talk a little bit maybe about customer experience, another area we spend a lot of time. And again, for a long time, our relationships with our customers were general. So if you think about the consumer business, we advertised on TV and we put out coupons and we hit the market. Today, using data from that group i360 internally and from others, and our own data analytics capability, we can be much more micro-targeted. We want to have a relationship with Sam Holmes, right? Hopefully we do, by the way. I know Sam pretty well, so I'm hoping. But we want to have a relationship with Sam Holmes, and we want to only push the things to Sam that matter to Sam. And then he can buy from us, he can buy from Walmart, he can buy wherever our products are. We want to make it work for him where he is from an omni-channel perspective, and we want to do that in a way that we know it's him. And by the way, that i360 group, particularly in the US, I mean, we got pretty good data on about 270 million Americans, way more than would make you comfortable. Some of it you've given us and some of it we can glean from other sources, but that's the reality. So we work with our customers in the retail business and in other parts of Koch where we're working with Lowe's or Home Depot or whoever, and we help them understand what's happening in their stores for the same reason and help them think about to change assortments, do those things. In any event, what that means for Sam is he can get what he wants, where he wants it, when he wants it, and he doesn't have to be inundated with everything else. We can help him make the right decision. The more he wants to share with us, the better we can do that. That's a simple example, and that's a more advanced example. There are other places like in the lumber business where it's actually still that phone on the wall and a fax machine. Well, it might be email now, but it's pretty close. Where we're trying to figure out what's the best method to disrupt this. And we've got people spending time working on that today, right? Because it's important. By the way, if you own 70% Infor, they might be able to help with that. One of the reasons we made the investment in Infor is because we recognize we need to make this transformation across Koch, and they're a whole lot better at it than us, right? It's a cloud-based platform that's been incredibly successful, a lot of capability in this space. Communication, I mentioned knowledge networks, and that the internal piece of that, I've already mentioned a couple examples, like the supply chain example. Let me give you a really internal example. So we have another business that I didn't show you up there called Koch Disruptive Technologies. And it invests in early stage venture businesses, typically B to E rounds. So that would be maybe post revenue, but not way down the path. And we were looking at an investment there in digital printing and metal, which for a lot of our businesses would be pretty valuable if we were successful with it from a spare parts perspective, from a make to order perspective, and other things that you could do. And it could disrupt a lot of markets if it's successful. And so we were working on the due diligence on that, and the team at Koch Disruptive Technologies decided to test what we call the Koch Lab. Do we have anybody that knows anything about this? So in a day, they put out feelers across Koch to say, do we have people that understand digital print and metal in a way that can be helpful to our due diligence? And through that knowledge network, in less than 24 hours, they identified 3 people, one in each of 3 different companies in different parts of the world, actually, that had knowledge here, some of it very deep rocket science style knowledge. And so those folks went to the company with our financial team and Koch Disruptive and went through the due diligence process and asked a lot of questions. And one of the things that came out of that is the founders of the company afterwards said, you know, we do a lot of these pitches and it's all financial people. This is really different. We want to work with you guys, right? So we made an investment in that business because we validated what we believed, but we also created a preferred partnership where we were bringing them unique capabilities from across Koch. And so we're deploying their technology in parts of Koch in an experimental way to test, right, and to accelerate their development. So that's an example of a knowledge network internally where we're trying to do that everywhere. It's a big focus for us. Talent, I'm not going to talk a lot about this because this is probably the thing you see most in the newspaper and on the news. Our goal is not to displace people. That said, there is no question that technology is going to displace jobs. It's also going to create jobs. And historically, that's exactly what's happened. And that's what we believe is going to happen. But we have to do what I described earlier, which is to enable our people to be successful, to be lifelong learners, and to develop the skills and capabilities they need. I'll share one example. We had a guy in a mill who started as a packer of boxes, literally taking bundles of toilet paper and putting it into boxes to pack them. Most of that's automated, but there's certain circumstances where you pick and pack. And this is what the guy did, and as you might imagine, that's not a very high-skilled job. And so he noticed that we were building a new converting hall, and in that converting hall, we were putting in all laser-guided vehicles and robotics. Very few people, almost dark warehouse. And he started to get interested, and he asked about learning about the robotics and about the LGVs and AGVs. And so he learned a bunch about it. We got him involved in one of those projects and let him go through the process of developing those skills, and he had the aptitudes to do it. Today, he is actually a guy that goes around from facility to facility, helping people automate and put in laser-guided vehicles and AGVs, and he's writing the programming. Pretty cool story. There's stories like that all over companies that are doing these things, right? But the idea with talent is to get things less mundane, safer, less boring, and free people up to work on things that, one, they can apply their own innate abilities to do, things that they're excited about, to develop valued skills, and then contribute in a way that's meaningful to the organization as a result of that and become fulfilled, or what we say internally, more fully self-actualized, right? That's what we focus on when we think about talent here. I put policy on here because it's an interesting one for me. We have, well, I use the auto example, and I'm going to use it a couple times in the last couple bullets here, but if you think about the rate of change that technology has brought to bear, regulators can't keep up. I mean, there's no way, right? And so if you think about autonomous vehicles as an example again, if a Tesla on self-driving mode hits somebody, it's a big deal. If a level 4 autonomous vehicle in Arizona runs somebody over on a bike, it's a big deal. Even if it's an order of magnitude safer than me driving, we're not comfortable when a machine does it, right? How is that going to get sorted out? So policy is going to be something you have to be thinking about when you're making these investments and moving down this transformation path. Because if it ends up going in a direction that doesn't work for you, you're going to have invested a whole lot of time and resources to get to a point you can't recover from. So understanding what happened in that arena is part of it. The other side is what I described on the preferred partnerships. So in our refining and chemicals business and our Molex business, we've partnered to build some capability around detecting leaks under insulation. It sounds very sexy, I realize, but it's a huge issue in the chemicals industry because you gotta understand if you're leaking a hazardous chemical. And today, the way that works, believe it or not, across the world, in America in particular, is there are people with backpacks on with a synthetic nose sniffer walking around by the equipment and the pipes, testing it under a protocol that's been approved by the EPA and everybody else, and it's been there for years. So we spent a ton of money doing that. We've developed sensors and capability and software and obviously all the IoT tools to get the data where it needs to be to do this real time with sensors. And we've been working for 2 years with the EPA to get this approved. It'll make it more effective, more efficient, and give much better information in real time that they can have access to. Just to give you a perspective, we're 2 years in, we still think it's going to take another to get it approved. It will get approved in our view, but the policy impacts are critical to all this transformation, and you have to partner. In that case, we would say we have a preferred partnership with EPA on what's called CRADAR, which is this activity. And then talking maybe a little bit more about bigger disruption and the policy impacts. It is difficult to underestimate, and I'm going to bring a couple of things I talked about together. So if you think about ride hailing, I mean, everybody likes the option, right? It's a lot more simple. It gives you your time back. You can sit in the car and do something else if you want to. And the autos are very much working on electrification and autonomy, by the way, which aren't related but are happening simultaneously. And so if you can get to a world where we really do have safe, capable, autonomous vehicles, why do we think it would be the same as the world we have today where everyone has their own? Why wouldn't it be mobility as a service where today you have that vehicle in your garage, you drive it when you need it, you park it somewhere, you pay for parking, you do all those things. All your time in the car is useless unless you're somebody who multitasks and shouldn't, right? No, but for real, right? And so I think our model, much like when Amazon first introduced the Kindle, was we're going to read books like this on the Kindle, right? So our model in our heads, I think a lot of people, without going through a process of digging into their point of view on what we call mobility, might say, we're going to just have cars, but they'll be autonomous, so I won't have to drive it, I can just sit in it. Well, it's still pretty expensive from a depreciation, from a real estate, from all kinds of perspectives to have individually owned vehicles. So why wouldn't we switch over time, especially in urban areas, to robotaxis or something like that, where it's not public transit per se, but you're hailing a ride and you're in a completely equipped, connected vehicle with all the tools you need to work if you want to take you where you need to be, and then go do something else. And the cost goes down by 75%. By the way, it's a reasonable estimate of what it could go down by. Your cost of mobility could go down 70, 75%. To guys like me, it sounds like crap. I mean, I want to have a car, right? But to millennials, I think it sounds more interesting. And to my kids who are younger than that, it sounds really interesting. And so I do think there's a chance that's where we go, but then who wins? Is it Ford and GM? Is it Tesla? Is it Google? Is it Hertz? And how does that mobility take place? And then what are the second order effects? If you get all that time back to be productive, and you're actually able to do what you want or watch a movie or do whatever you want in the vehicle. And by the way, when you get there, it doesn't have to park. And at your house, it doesn't have to park. You don't need a garage. You got all that real estate back. You don't need parking garages downtown, right? You just have more space for productive activities or wherever they are, in the suburbs, whatever. Think about the second order effects on productivity and the other assets that are deployed just so we can park these underutilized vehicles. If you don't have a point of view on those kind of things and you're an auto like we are, we're a huge transportation fuel manufacturer in the refining business. In Molex, we make connector components for all kinds of vehicles, right, all over the world. We actually also are thinking about this. We have a 10 gigabit Ethernet backbone that is going to help with latency in vehicles as we get toward these self-driving things, because reaction time is going to be pretty critical. We have a huge business in Guardian that makes chromed and painted auto parts. So every Ford F-150 grill anywhere in the world, we make. And we have a huge business in Invista that makes nylon that goes into automotive from the standpoint of both airbags and in components for heat and pressure resistance. And by the way, battery management systems need more of it. So there's all kinds of questions, but we have to have a point of view about where this is going to go and what it means for how many cars there are going to be and how they're going to work and what they're going to do. And so if we're not thinking about how's that value chain going to shift and creating the options depending on how it actually happens, we're missing opportunities and we might find ourselves obsolete or dead, right? Because the reality in all this is that's what happens. Creative destruction puts you out of business. And so we're thinking about those things all over, and that's also why we have this group called Disruptive Technologies. They're out there in the marketplace looking for technologies that are disruptive to us or to other industries where we think they have a chance of significant, I mean, we're probably gonna be wrong 7 out of 10 times, but the ones we're right on we think are gonna be huge. And that's the bet with this. And we think the Koch lab that I described earlier and our capabilities makes us more likely to be better off there than not. And so these are kind of some of the things. I could give you thousands of examples across all the Koch companies of things we're doing. If I left you with 2 things, it would be we got to be aligned that the vision is we can't sit still. The status quo is unacceptable. Tomorrow we have to be better than we are today and much better. And the second thing is the value of knowledge, and you can lump data into that, has to be something you can get at immediately like it's liquid across the borderless organization, or somebody else is going to beat you because they're going to do that. And that's the value that you have in figuring out how to build those knowledge networks and get that information so you have insight about everything you're doing, whether it's how your asset runs, what your customer wants, or how a market's going to change. Being in a position to understand those things is critical to success across every business we have and for every individual in their own development. So that's what I wanted to share. Now I'd open it up for any of your questions.
We have microphones that will be passed around. If you have a question, just wait for the microphone. And this is being recorded for Terry.
Nope.
Hello, my name's Ryan Summers. I'm a student at the University of Georgia right now. My question for you revolves around vision and disruption. When you think about vision and disruption, do you see that disruption changes your vision for the company, or do you see that vision remains constant amidst like a changing environment?
It's a good question. I think the revisions and the changes in the vision that we have for Koch that I described are reflecting the forces of that transformation and disruption. And so I think there's a little of both happening there. I think we have to evolve because if our expectations as individual employees or as an organization are that this is different than it was. Not that creative destruction didn't always exist. I mean, Schumpeter came up with that many, many moons ago, but it's happening much faster. And so we felt the need to make it much clearer, much crisper. And look, if I spent 1 minute, the Koch vision is this big, broad vision, right? Every business has its own vision. Every team inside the organization also has a vision. All of these things should be reinforcing of achieving the Koch vision. But if I get to the individual, I should have a list of roles, responsibilities, and the expectations that come with those that are connected to the group I'm part of, right? And those things all have to be adjusted. And what we would say is they have to be more fluid now than ever because of what's happening for the exact reason you asked.
My name is Shelly Boykin. I'm also a student at UGA. My question kind of touches on vision. So we have a lot of companies that come to campus and talk about their vision. And as a leader of a company, how do you effectively communicate that vision to the employees within the company that are at various levels?
That is a great question. So you heard me at the very beginning talk about alignment. And in our management philosophy and our approach, we communicate broadly, but we also communicate in the organization one-on-one. So I have 7 or 8 direct reports, and I view my role as to communicate these things with them and make sure we're aligned, and they have to do the same thing with theirs. That's the sort of inward method of how we do it, and that goes all the way to what's in your roles, responsibilities, and expectations. And that's something we do at least on an annual basis with everybody, every single person in Koch in theory, right? I mean, we're nowhere near perfect at any of the stuff I described, by the way, and we fail all the time, and there's no doubt about it. But that's what we're trying to do is make that connectivity happen. And what I always tell people as individuals is if you don't understand how what you're working on is connected to the vision and creating value, go ask your supervisor. It's your obligation to do that, right? And I think that's how we want people thinking about what their role is in the organization, is connecting to What are we doing that creates value? And if we're doing something we don't think does, let's stop doing it. And it's hard to stop doing stuff, by the way. Anybody who works in a big company knows. Like once even if you're an accountant and there's a report you develop, because somebody asked a question once and now every month you generate it, there's a cost to that, right? And there's no value being created if no one really needed it and they're not making decisions based on that data. Yet we see that all the time. We will go through a process periodically of asking that question in our organization. And I can share a specific example. We looked at it and said in this one business, it's a big business, we found in the accounting organization there was 25,000 monthly reports generated. Now, all kinds of different things, right? And we said, okay, let's bucket them strategically. Critical decision information, we know who has the need for it and we understand what it costs and they're buying it and they want it. Not so sure, can't understand why we're doing it. 5,000 of them fell in that last bucket and we stopped doing them and nobody asked the question. The ones in the middle, we said, figure out what it costs to generate that report and go to the person who gets it and ask them if it's worth it, because they're paying for it, right? And that kind of work isn't that easy to do because people don't want to do it, but it really is important because stopping anything, and I'm using accounting because I'm a bean counter, but this is true about anything we do, right? I mean, in any organization, we got all kinds of activities that go on because we did it last year or we did it yesterday, and we do it every day. And if you're not at work, contribution motivated with your lights on, thinking about, does this make any sense? Why? Then you're not really going to be fulfilled by the work you're doing because you don't know whether you're creating value or not. Good question. Sam?
You did a great job talking about change and disruption. If you're dean of Terry College or you're chancellor of the board of regents, what do you do to keep education at the forefront of the change and disruption?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I don't think technology is a solution, it's an enabler. So I'll use technology as an example. I don't know enough about UGA's programs or Terry's programs to be specific, but if you're not developing online curriculum that people can access where they want it, when they want it, but with a level of capability, certification, and all the kinds of things it needs, rigor, to be churning out graduates. By the way, of that program at a cost that's lower than the in-classroom stuff, you're going to get crushed because people are doing it all over the place, right? And that's one simple example. I think everywhere in the organization, you have to be asking the same questions I was asking: is this creating value or not, and why? And there's different drivers of value in a university system, without question, right? I mean, what the value is of research and research at what level, and publication at what level, and time in the classroom versus time in research. I don't know the answers to those questions, but you ought to have a sense of what those are, and are they going to change or not, and why? In any organization, and you ought to have some measures that help you understand what's happening there. So I think, people have been saying this for years, so I'm not going to say it with any certainty, but the cost of education continues to go up at a rate that's higher than the cost of most other things going up. And the question is that going to be sustainable at some point, or how's it going to get disrupted? And Saul Kahn hasn't been able to do it with Khan Academy, but somebody's going to figure out something. Although today what I understand is the applications are up at blue chip schools and down at the other ones, right? And so it's not happening yet. So that's why I said it feels like you got a little more time if you're in education. Sam?
Jim, transformation starts high. I believe Charles posted in the late 80s announced succession plan.
It took longer to get to that question than I expected. Charles is not, he's in his mid-80s. He's 84, but there's not an announced plan, but there's plans, obviously. And Charles is, not that this has anything to do with that question per se, other than Charles is actively involved in the business. He's in the office, during the weekend. On the weekends, he's working. He's writing books. He's got a huge social change network going called Stand Together through the Charles Koch Institute, the foundation, and a bunch of partners around the country. And he's an incredible guy. He's going to work till he falls off the bike, though, or gets knocked off. I'm pretty confident of that. That said, there is a plan. It's not something that I'm going to share, though. Thanks for asking that. I get asked that question a lot, right? So.
I have two children, sons who are in Georgia. One is in computer science as a freshman, one's a junior in finance. If you were to start out, what career advice would you give them, junior, for example, coming out of college, as far as staying relevant? Because it seems to me that some of the education becomes irrelevant almost when they graduate. It's applying to the job skills that are necessary in the future.
Yeah, I think there's probably a mix there, but it's foundational in everything for sure. But I would say, in the way I usually talk to young young new hire kind of folks is to say, understand what your organization's trying to accomplish, the vision piece, right? Understand how what you do contributes to that. If you don't understand it, ask the question, and do stuff you like. Because if you, I mean, look, I'm pretty much this way with everyone. I say, if you're working on something and you don't like it, your life's going to suck because you're going to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing it. It's going to be awful. So find out what your passions are, connect those to what you do, and then find opportunities to create value with those passions. And I think that's bigger than the question of, do I stay relevant or not? Because it's much more important to your own fulfillment and self-actualization, again, as we would say. That's what I say to my own kids, who are one in college, one in high school, and one in middle school. But the reality is, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, even when I went to college. And when I got out of college, if you said, would I be doing this today, I'd have said no, right? So I think you have to be open to what changes in your life and what is fulfilling for you and what your real aptitudes are and where those things create value. So there's not one answer, but that's the way I think about it.
Hi, my name is Nick Borkovich. I'm also a current student at the University of Georgia. But from your position, how do you create like a single unified company culture over multiple companies?
Yeah, so great question. So that market-based management philosophy that we use is, I'll break it into three broad buckets. The first one is the culture. And we have a set of guiding principles, 8 guiding principles that define our culture effectively, that are the behaviors we're looking to see in all of our people and especially our leaders. And I mean, by leaders, I don't mean the CEO only, I mean everyone in the organization. But if you're running a piece of equipment in a plant in Chengdu, China, we want you embodying these principles, right? So you need to internalize them. So we do some very straightforward things like create tools and training. But more importantly, we hire based on fit to culture and virtue first, and skills and knowledge second, for sure. And we do that very deliberately. We work in that one-on-one relationship between a supervisor and their direct report and focus on that. And we try to reward people based on their contributions to that culture in addition, and we certainly fire people. We make deselection decisions, if I want to say it softly, in relation to people who don't fit the culture or behave in a way that's consistent with those principles. And then we do that deliberately through all of our activities. So if you were working with our talent acquisition folks, they would talk to you in that language, right? If you were to look at how we do training and development across the organization, and that could be, or how we work with consultants, or how we manage change, right? If we have a project going on and we need change management teams in there, a lot of that time is actually spent on, is what we're doing consistent with this culture, right? And do we make sure that the language doesn't even get out of whack on that? So we do everything we can to reinforce it in our behaviors, and we hold leaders to a much higher standard on that than we do everyone else. So that is something we spend a tremendous amount of time on.
So as someone whose time I'm sure is very valuable, what do you use as kind of your metrics to know what to say next? And oftentimes that can be where that value really is.
Yeah. So opinions vary, by the way, on that first question, but no. So look, what I try to do, sometimes consciously, more often unconsciously, is always understand in the organizations I'm working with what are the biggest priorities in that business, and is that where I'm spending my time or not? So, by the way, each of those companies that reports to me has an incredibly capable CEO and team. So it's not like I have to go do everything, right? So I spend my time working with the leaders in those businesses and their teams, trying to challenge, add to, think about, are those the right priorities to achieve our vision? Do we have the right capabilities and resources to do it? Are there places we could get help that we're not getting help? Those kinds of things. And is this even the right strategy, and why, right? And that is a place that if I stay at that level of activity, I feel pretty good about it in terms of in each of the businesses. And so I could tell you, for example, for each of my companies, what their top 3 or 4 priorities are and why, and how they're leading those and resourcing them and what they're spending time on, and I check in on it very regularly, and I engage in it in a way where, I'm challenging or supporting depending on the circumstances. Are we doing the right things or not? And so that's one. Then there's a second thing which I would call the sudden and urgent things that require attention. So there's always something on fire, and hopefully I don't mean literally, but sometimes actually I mean literally. But like, it could be an acquisition, it could be a big capital project, it could be a big personnel issue, it could be a compliance issue, it could be a legal issue. Sometimes those things come up very quickly, and they create a time sink, and they move to the top because you have a timeline you've got to meet. And so I try to manage my schedule that way. And then there's a lot, like as you heard, I'm on a bunch of the boards, so I go to a bunch of board meetings, do those kinds of things. But I try, even in those meetings, to only focus and reinforce those things that I think are most important. And I try to work with our teams in the businesses to actually use those board meetings, not to report, but to get discussions going with a board that we've assembled that we think is valuable in helping them achieve their vision, to bring real issues, their top priorities and challenges, and let the board contribute in a meaningful way to them versus just reading out. If we get in and we're doing a slide flip, which is why I kind of said the slide thing, we don't project slides in our board meetings, right? We sit and talk. There may be some paper that's involved in the discussion, but hopefully it's not more than, even in a company size Georgia Pacific, 25 or 30 pages for all of the businesses total, right? Because we want to talk about what matters and what we can help them with, and we're not spending 14 days doing it, so we got to make it. I try to apply those same principles kind of to everything I do, and then there's the balance of my family and working out and all those things, and I make sure all those things happen and I build routines around them. So it's not always perfect and they get disrupted, but that's how it goes. Okay, one more.
I'm curious,
All right.
as invested as you are in the automotive industry, you talked about what the challenges are. Do you have a feel for the timeline of those changes that are happening?
So, I mean, look, I have lots of people who have ideas about that, and I've been in lots of discussions about that, and I think there's a huge it depends. So if you're in an environment where you get a lot of regulatory drive to do it, and you have a relatively controlled environment, so Singapore, I think the odds that you're electrified and autonomous are much higher in a nearer window when you got 5 or 6 million people on an island and the government is relatively prescriptive in its regulatory frameworks around that. And so, getting a license plate for a car in Singapore, for example, requires a significant amount of money. They're trying to dissuade there being too many vehicles to cause traffic and pollution, all those other things, right? Separate sidebar, but places like that, I think you'll see shifts happen where you can do it technologically as fast as they can happen. Places like the US, where you've got the big mix of rural and urban, every urban is different, the governments are different state by state and federally. There's a lot of incentives in the business environment and the regulatory environment to have different outcomes. I think it's going to be a lot slower, and let's say the technology's there to be fully. A lot of people think you can get level 4 autonomy, which still isn't no driver probably for the most part, in the next 3, 4, 5 years. There are some people who say no way, but even if you get to that, I think the odds, you and I are going to be driving together on Lennox Road with a bunch of autonomous vehicles that people aren't confident in is almost zero, right? So we're either not going to be allowed on Lennox Road, and they're only going to be those AVs, we'll see how this evolves, but that's what's possible. My personal view is before a significant portion of the fleet is all autonomous, forget the electrification, because that's really just a question of how do we power them. I think you're talking about 15, 20, 25 years, and just to turn over the cars, I mean, the average car life is about 11 years now, right? And then you got a bunch of people like me who don't want to give up driving. And so that's going to take a cultural and mind shift where I see the value to do it. And so, there's a lot of competing factors, but I think it's going to be quite a while. So, okay. Thanks very much. Okay.
Stay up here for a minute. All right?
Okay, yeah.
And you certainly set the tone at the top. That was an awesome presentation. Thanks for sharing the Koch transformation story. There are a lot of places you could have been today. Thank you for picking your friends at Terry. On behalf of the Terry Alumni Board, we have a little glass sculpture for you as
Try not to break it.
a representation of your love for red and black. So
Excellent.
thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you for being
Thanks
here.
very much.
Thanks everybody else for being here. Your up-to-date iPhones. February 20th is the next session. We look forward to seeing you. Make sure you get your validated parking. And thanks for being here. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you. Yeah, that was awesome. Good.